The German infantry was now in high spirits. Their retreat, which had started in North Africa, was now at an end. They had plenty of time to fortify their defenses on the Gustav Line, where they would finally make a determined stand. The Allies had to devise new methods of advancing through this hostile country, as this American newsreel explains.
A topographical map shows how the mountains lie like an endless row of fortresses, each protected by its moat, a river at right angles athwart our line of march. Here, weeks were consumed forcing a single pass, crossing a single river. 100 men often held up 1,000. Let us see on this typical situation how the Germans defended the pass and the methods we used to capture it. Beyond the demolished bridges, the Germans laid minefields and emplaced machine guns and anti-tank guns to cover the minefields and bridgehead. Further back, they built pillboxes and concealed artillery just over the crest of the mountains. To take a position like this, we first had to lay down a tremendous artillery barrage. Behind this, our infantry had to swim the river at night, clear a way through the minefield, and put the machine guns and anti-tank guns out of action. Only then could pontoon bridges be put down and our artillery brought across. Then, as our guns went to work on the pillboxes and on the enemy artillery in the mountains, the infantry captured the pass by working around the enemy's flank, storming the pillboxes from side and rear, and silencing them with grenades and flamethrowers. Much of the time, the going was too steep for vehicles, and muscle and mule took over. Supplies were brought through over precarious trails.
The rains of the winter turned to snow, and the advance became bogged down some 80 miles south of Rome.
Heavy snow one day, then a bit of a thaw to follow. Talk about slush. It certainly provided one more test for that versatile vehicle, the Jeep. Decent roads in this part of Italy aren't very numerous anyway, and a heavy snowfall scarcely helps at all. And as a matter of fact, this is the main road leading up to Orsogna, so it has to be kept clear, rain, blow, or snow. Supplies must go forward.
By the winter of 1943 to 1944, the broad place of the Italian campaign in the Allied strategy was set. Italy was a secondary theatre. The war could not be won there. It could only be won on the Eastern Front by the Soviet Union and by the campaign in northwest Europe that would begin with the Normandy landings. However, in order to assist both these more important campaigns, the Allies, and particularly the British under Churchill, wanted a continuing offensive on the Italian front. The idea was to attack hard enough to convince the Germans that Italy was critical ground, in order to tie down German forces in Italy. So the troops in Italy were in the very difficult position of having to mount attacks with inadequate resources over extremely difficult terrain, in the knowledge that no decisive results would come from them, but that by holding down German forces and making things difficult for the Germans, they were contributing to the wider war effort. It's the role of troops in a secondary theatre. It's always a very difficult role to carry out.
A story from the Garigliano front, before the Fifth Army's new landings, of course. Mount Petrella in the background, the village in the foreground is in no man's land, and the story is a close-up of artillery action, the shelling of the hamlet of Suio and a bridge across the Garigliano River. Major Price from Crawley, Sussex, and Signaller Cummings of Swansea in the observation post, a bombed mill.
Regimental target. Regimental target. Loser. 362715. 362-715.
One of the 5.5 guns. Gunner Kelford of Buckley Chester is the layer.
Regiment ready. Fire.
The firer is Gunner Flynn of Clifton, Bristol. The rest of the gun crew are Sergeant Williams of Stafford, Gunners McNamara of Dalston, Clarkson of Enfield, Whitfield of Burslem, Cooper of Christchurch, Cambridgeshire, Hargreaves of Byfleet, and Signaller Skinner from Edgware. Close-up detail on the Fifth Army front made by Paul Wyand of Movietone, whose camera was 3.5 miles from the village being shelled. Sonia, a story of softening up ahead of our advance. The Allies, holding air supremacy on the Italian front, have been taking full advantage of that asset. But until the Luftwaffe has been totally crushed, it's obviously impossible to keep the enemy completely out of the sky. An air battle was soon in progress, with Allied aircraft driving off the Hun or shooting him down.
The Garigliano and Rapido rivers would have to be crossed, but they were heavily defended. The British and American troops tried in vain for 2 days to advance past the rivers, but fierce enemy resistance meant the attacks were called off.
The idea of a large-scale amphibious operation to try and get round the position by landing troops further north was made less and less likely by the increasing demands on specialist troops and on landing craft by the Normandy landings set for June 1944. However, after a certain amount of dispute and the intervention of Churchill personally, it was agreed that a small-scale landing, a corps in strength, might be made and would be made in January 1944, a short distance north of the Gustav Line positions. The idea was that this landing would be followed shortly afterwards by an attack in the west of the Gustav Line to link up. The place chosen for the amphibious landing was Anzio. Neither of the Allies could spare a complete corps for the operation. 6th American Corps was in fact an amalgam of American and British forces.
American, British and French troops of 6th Corps landed on the beaches of Anzio at 2 a.m. on January the 22nd, 1944. Once again, there was very little resistance, and the potential of a push to Rome was a distinct possibility. Troops managed to advance some 10 miles inland.
Naples was one of the places from which Allied forces sailed on that bold and successful combined operation, the new landings near Anzio, only 30 miles from Rome. This is the first film to reach Britain of that operation, which evidently caught the Germans napping and placed General Kesselring in a most awkward dilemma. When our troops were embarking, he'd already called up reserves to the Casino front. The Allied timing could hardly have been better. Salerno, scene of such critical fighting when our landings were made there, was now a place of embarkation. What a different scene this time, with scores of ducks about to take to the water, troops going aboard and landing craft putting to sea. The force was transported in ships of many different sizes, from small landing craft to large troop carriers. Everyone was in good heart, and remember, at this time they may well have expected strong opposition to their landing. All of them veterans, with the confidence born of experience and victories already won, they passed some of the time on the voyage north like this.
We're saying goodbye to them all, as back to the village they go. There'll be no...
As we all know, the ships reached their destination in safety and exactly on time. Organization and planning were beyond praise. Every precaution against attack was taken, and it goes without saying that air support was one of the vital factors of success. Air support and naval support, both were complete and effective. At dawn, the troops and their equipment were landed. At some points, the vessels could come right up to the beach. At others, there was difficulty in getting vehicles ashore through deeper water or over soft sand. As for the Navy, they were, as usual, 100% efficient. Bringing the force up to the landing places precisely on time, they got them ashore without a hitch. Their smoothly efficient work on occasions like this often escapes notice, but it didn't escape the cameramen at the Anzio beaches. General Alexander himself was soon on the spot. With him is Rear Admiral Trowbridge. General Clark was there too, of course. Seeing how everything was going, they must have been feeling highly delighted. As a matter of fact, the day after those shots had been taken, a change in weather took place. Landings were temporarily held up by a fresh wind and rather rough seas, which did a small amount of damage. A good illustration of one factor at least, which may seriously interfere with almost any combined operation. Bad weather, however, didn't last long, and meanwhile, Allied airmen had been at work. Bostons, among other types, flew in over the beaches to bomb the Germans and their communications further inland. Our control of the air was virtually complete. Attacks by the Luftwaffe were beaten off by our fighters, while our Bostons and other aircraft continued to bomb. Down there's the Mussolini Canal, many of its bridges blown up. As the landings continued to go ahead, the beachheads were consolidated and extended with remarkably little interference. One enemy gun shelling incoming landing craft registered a number of misses before it was captured.
The strident tone of the newsreels masked the stalemate that was taking place.
As more and more troops and material came ashore, the push inland towards the line of communications between Rome and Cassino advanced, and first prisoners were already being brought in. The port of Anzio, Antium in ancient days, showed plenty signs of blitz. Once Nero used to come here to make whoopee, and in more recent times that equally notorious fiddler, Mussolini. But now the Allies were there and well beyond. The operation was a complete success so far. The Germans had been taken by surprise, and a big leap forward on the road to Rome had been effected. first phase was over, but the next phase, involving heavy fighting and many grim days, still lay ahead.
The orders for the American Corps commander were ambiguous. He was ordered to advance on the Alban Hills, not to the Alban Hills, whatever that means. Generally speaking, after the problems at Salerno and the previous experience in Sicily, the emphasis was on caution and waiting for the link-up from the offensive coming from the Gustav Line. Well, as it turned out, caution was taken too far. Perhaps an opportunity was there for a breakout from Anzio to reach Rome, but it was never taken. The Anzio beachhead was roped off. It could be reinforced and held from the sea, but there was no possibility of a breakout after the first couple of weeks. And in Winston Churchill's withering phrase, I thought we were throwing a wildcat onto the beach to rip the bowels out of the Boche. Instead, we have a stranded whale.
The morale of the troops was lifted by visiting entertainers.
I should be here in battle dress. You know, when I left England to come and work for Enser, they said, you'll have to wear a battle dress. I said, well, what's the idea? I mean, after all, I'm an actor, not a soldier. So they said, well, you'll have to wear a battle dress because if you get captured by the Germans, they'll shoot you. I said, if the Germans capture me, they're entitled to shoot me. Good afternoon, rich people. Anyway, first Americans I've seen not riding in a Jeep. Oh, they've all got their own personal Jeeps. Yeah. Same as this one they've given me. Gave it to me instead of a gas mask. Took one look at my face and said, we're awfully sorry, but we've got no gas masks for horses.
A more personal note was struck by messages home in Movietone newsreels.
Personal messages complete with latest portraits sent by newsreel from Italy to Britain. More of the boys out there have now made use of the Movietone microphone to greet their families here at home. The first is a Midlander, Ernie Cole of the RASC, who's been away 1 year.
Hello, Mum and Joan. How are you going on? Here I have struck a lucky chance and speaking over a microphone in front of some cameras and a bit nervous in speaking. Hope you're keeping all right at home. I've only got 20 seconds to speak, so I have to say, remember me to all at home. Hope you'll keep on fine. So cheerio, goodbye and good luck. Hope to see you soon, Ernie.
And a West Countryman, Danny Ellison, REME, Africa Star, also 2 years away.
Hello, Mum. Hello, Dad. This is Danny speaking. How are you? I'm all right. Your mail is coming through very regular. Hope mine is doing the same. Cheerio. Lots of love. Danny. Hello, Diana. This is Danny speaking. Hope to see you soon. And to do what we've always said we'd want to do. Cheerio. All my love.
The latest flashes from Anzio show troops moving up to the front. Of course, almost the whole of the area is really the front. As at Salerno, so here at Anzio, close naval support has been invaluable. Indeed, throughout these critical days, all services, British and American, have worked as one. A landing ground constructed early on has enabled Spitfires to refuel on the spot. This has been of the greatest possible assistance in keeping the skies clear of any strong forces of the Luftwaffe over the beachhead. But naturally, it's not been possible to prevent all attacks by enemy aircraft. They've been flying a number of sorties by day and by night, doing damage to ammunition dumps and shipping. Critical day, no doubt of that, but our anxiety for the Allied forces locked in this bitter struggle has been somewhat eased by the Premier's recent statement based on confident reports from Generals Wilson and Alexander.
The Germans managed to counterattack and bitter fighting erupted. The Allies were pushed back by Kesselring's troops, mile by mile. Finally, the Allies were left stalled in the Anzio area, having suffered heavy casualties. The focus of attacks would have to be switched once again. The town of Cassino was the anchor point in the Gustav Line. Located halfway between Naples and Rome, it was the gateway to Highway 6, the road to Rome. Overlooking the town was a Benedictine monastery constructed in the 6th century. It had seen its fair share of wars over the last 1400 years because of its strategic importance.
The way through to Rome depended upon taking the Monte Cassino position, both the village at the base of the mountain itself and the actual mountain position, topped by a famous Benedictine monastery, opening the way through into the valley of the river Liri, which again would lead through to Rome and to further advances. But until Monte Cassino was taken, it overlooked completely the Allied positions.
The Allied troops that had been stalled there for the winter had come to dislike its imposing presence.
Given that it would not be until spring 1944 that the weather would improve and that the Allies would have the kind of resources they needed to mount a major offensive, logically, in terms of the Italian campaign itself, they could have spent the winter of 1943-44 on the defensive on the Gustav Line, generally making themselves comfortable. But wider Allied strategy meant that that was not possible. They had to keep attacking. And altogether, 3 major attacks were launched between November 1943 and April 1944 with very little effect whatsoever, under very difficult conditions. There was simply no way that they could succeed against determined German defence. The airmen also tried to make their contribution with Operation Strangle, an attempt to bomb the communications north of the German positions and throughout northern Italy, knocking out bridges, railway lines, hitting transport, trying to deprive the Germans of essential equipment. It was attempted. The results are much disputed. It's doubtful if it made any major contribution, but everything was being tried. In February 1944, the Allies made the decision to bomb Cassino Monastery. The argument at the time was that the Germans were using it as an observation post. There's very little evidence to suggest that there were any German troops in there at all, and frankly, the rubble afterwards just made a rather better observation post anyway. If there's an explanation for the bombing of Monte Cassino, it is simply the psychological impact of that great lowering monastery overlooking the Allied positions. One British soldier described it as an evil thing. It just had to be bombed. And the bombing of Cassino is perhaps best interpreted just as an expression of Allied frustration at the difficulties of trying to break through this extraordinarily hard position.
This movie-tone newsreel tries to justify the bombing.
In this worldwide total war, there's no exemption from the possibility of being involved in frontline action. The monastery of Monte Cassino would have escaped if the Germans hadn't used it as a part of their Gustav Line defense system, but it dominated the town of Cassino, 1,700 feet below. It dominated the road to Rome, and the Germans were making full use of it for military purposes. Down below in Cassino, a bitter struggle had been raging for weeks. You don't need to be a military genius to appreciate the advantage to the Germans in their occupation and fortification of Monte Cassino itself and the monastery. It's perfectly true, of course, that the monastery, founded by St. Benedict in the 6th century on the site of the Roman Temple of Apollo, was a building of tremendous historic and material value. It had been a center of culture and learning for hundreds of years. Those are the very reasons, in fact, why the Allied attack was held up until the last moment. Even then, warning leaflets were conveyed to all the civilians concerned, Benedictine monks and Italians who might be in or near the monastery. This is how the leaflets were conveyed. Our attack had been postponed, warnings had been given, absolute military necessity could permit no further reprieve. So the bombers came over, Mitchells, Marauders and Fortresses. The sensational pictures which follow were taken by Paul Wyand of Movietone and leave no possible doubt as to the thoroughness with which the task was carried out once the decision had been taken. That's only the beginning. You'll notice, of course, how the sound of the bombs follows some time after the explosions, and you'll have noticed the dome at one end of the building. You won't see that again. Obviously, the attack was designed to embrace enemy fortifications on the sides of the hill, as well as the monastery itself. Most of the building, by the way, dates from the 17th century, only one very small section from the original foundation. Germany, of course, has denied that her troops occupied the place before the bombardment. Visual evidence that they were there completely demolishes that story, for many Germans were seen earlier making their getaway. has been affected. A historic building, and not for the first time, even on this actual site, has been brought to ruin. But no one with a proper sense of values, weighing the importance of a building against the importance of the lives of our men, can do anything but fully endorse this regrettable military necessity.
The town of Cassino itself also came in for heavy punishment.
This is the position, Cassino itself and the hills behind it, Castle Hill, Monastery Hill and the rest, that has been holding up the Allied advance on Rome. Holding it up for many weeks of fierce fighting. And these are the pictures of the recent attempt to gain a decision with the aid of a concentrated bombing attack. Paul Wyand of Movietone was there to record the bombardment, and a number of other newsreel and service cameramen. The terrific attack was opened by several waves of medium bombers which plastered the approaches to the town of Cassino and the town itself. The plan was to try and crush the German defensive position and by reducing the town to rubble, enable infantry and armor to follow up immediately and get through. No doubt about the severity of the attack, and after the medium bombers came the heavies, Forts and Liberators, in addition to more Mitchells and Marauders, wave after wave of them. Wave after wave came over and unloaded. A very thorough job, during which enemy aircraft left them severely alone. Watching these pictures of the bombardment, you might well think the place would be obliterated. It was, in fact, more or less reduced to rubble. Altogether, something like 2,500 tons of bombs were dropped on a target area of about 1 square mile, not to mention the bombing of communications to the north and northwest.
Every attack on the town by the Allies was met by fierce resistance from the Fallschirmjäger troops left to defend the area. Conditions were likened to the trenches of the First World War. The invading Allied troops were a true multinational force, with forces from Britain, America, Canada, France, New Zealand, India, South Africa, and even Brazil. Other troops from as far as Palestine and Senegal also joined the fighting. Many of these troops suffered in the fighting around Cassino, often cut off from supplies in the freezing cold of the Italian winter. Time and time again, advances were stalled short of their objectives, and casualties were high. The German paratroopers were tenacious in their grip on the area, and 3 major battles failed to take the area for the Allies. The first battle took place in January. By the end of April, they were still no nearer to their objective.
As long as the Germans could hold their ground, although they were consuming ammunition and taking casualties, they were using very little fuel, and they were required to make much less effort than the Allies in trying to break this strong position. That meant that they could hold the Gustav Line with relatively fewer troops than the Allies needed to attack it. And the exact cost to benefit gain for the Allies in trying to hold down German troops in North Italy, the whole basis of the Italian strategy, is open to question. It's an extremely hard calculation to make. Arguably, the campaign tied up more Allied resources than it did German, but certainly the Allies had a superiority in resources that made this possible. Given that as long as they were fighting in Italy, the threats were there both to southern France and to Yugoslavia, there's almost a total of 40 German divisions involved in the south of Europe in the Italian campaign. But the Germans could rotate in and out fresh divisions comparatively easily, given the Allied control of the air, in order to maintain their defence.
General Alexander then took over the campaign, and planning began for a 4th battle, codenamed Operation Diadem. This would utilize the 8th Army and the 2nd Polish Corps. The Americans and French under the 5th Army would continue their push out of Anzio and aim to advance across the westward end of the Gustav Line. The Allies tried to deceive the Germans by planning a false amphibious landing near Rome. Kesselring fell for this and ordered 3 of his divisions to move closer to Rome. He also ordered a new line of defense called the Hitler Line to be built 6 miles behind the Gustav Line. On May the 11th, 1944, Diadem started. Artillery pounded the Cassino sector. Units of the 8th pushed forwards, and by the end of the first day had established a bridgehead into the Liri Valley.
Here's a 6-pounder anti-tank gun at work. As you'll see in a moment, its fire was returned. A captured German 75 is turned to good use by New Zealanders who fired a large quantity of ammunition kindly left behind. Finally, the infantry went forward to the assault. Forward to Cassino, in the streets of which such heavy fighting had already taken place. Even now, in spite of the unprecedented air bombardment, the most bitter hand-to-hand fighting was to follow. Somehow, the enemy was still able to fight in Cassino. Whether they'd remained there in deep shelters or had returned after the bombing, they were there, still defending the place with great determination. The town of Cassino had been destroyed, but the Battle of Cassino went on. The end of the story had still to be told.
The town of Cassino was finally taken after months of bitter
The
fighting.
latest film from the Italian front shows the occupation of Cassino. There, where those soldiers are climbing over the rubble, was once the Hotel Continental, a famous strongpoint in the German defenses of the town. Cassino, the scene of one of the most grim and stubborn battles of the war, was eventually outflanked, captured, and occupied by British troops. Remnants of the enemy garrison were mopped up. Here come a few of the last to surrender. That bloke's a German paratroop. He certainly looks all washed up. And he's followed by one or two more, probably the last Germans to be rounded up in Cassino, the fortress they were not able to hold in spite of a most skillful and resolute defense. The monastery was occupied by Polish troops, what was left of it. The enemy, by using it for military purposes, had compelled the Allies to blast them out by shells and bombs. Now, Polish soldiers inspecting the abbey ruins examine German observation posts and see for themselves how well the enemy had been able to overlook Cassino and the valley beyond. At another point amid the ruins, they find a German mortar position. Ammunition was still there, and they found a German weapon something like the American bazooka. Sheer military necessity caused the smashing of this ancient monastery, but even after all the bombardments, art treasures were discovered undamaged, and mosaics on the walls of a chapel were more or less intact. All the same, by the time the Union Jack and the Polish flag were flying over it, the monastery of Cassino was mostly ruin and rubble, a monument to German ruthlessness and to Allied victory in the battle for Rome. New film dispatches from Italy include pictures of reinforcements landing at Anzio just before the successful offensive was made from the bridgehead. This is part of the largest number of troops ever to arrive there in one day. Not a man or a gun was lost in the operation. As to the offensive itself, everyone knows how well that went, with thrusts in 3 directions. One of these quickly resulted in the occupation of Littoria, where the enemy pulled out in a hurry. The picture shows our troops entering, hot on their heels. Many trophies were found in Littoria, and the advance continued towards Cisterna. On the Cassino front, Piedemonte is shelled by Polish forces. And here are some of the first Poles to enter the town. The captain leads his patrol up an apparently deserted street, while a Tommy gunner gives covering fire. They find a German dugout, and it's still occupied. But in this case, they're no suicide squad. On the contrary, all the fight seems to have gone out of the prisoners taken here. Further along Highway 6, British troops capture Aquino. A platoon charges through the ruins to mop up any resistance. Their job to deal with snipers and rear guards. The town captured, mines are cleared, and more prisoners taken. At every point, as the Allied advance goes on, prisoners keep coming in. Kesselring has been losing thousands of men and tons of equipment. The battle in Italy now is a battle for the liquidation of his army, and good progress towards that end has been made since these pictures were taken on the 25th of May. Back at Anzio, yet more prisoners march away into captivity. And at the beach, they find plenty of accommodation waiting for them. For some of them, no doubt, our landing craft were a bit of an eye-opener. The scene is somewhere between the Anzio bridgehead area and the Fifth Army front. The occasion is the actual link-up of the two forces. British troops from the Anzio front, men from that force which has held its ground so long against every counterattack, meet Americans who have driven through from the south. A great moment, not only for those on the spot, but obviously for the whole Allied cause.
Hi, I'm from London. I'm from Pennsylvania.
You had a good trip?
It was a hard flight, but we did it, though.
Good. I'm sure glad to see you.
Yeah.
It's been tough on the beach, I'll tell you.
It's tough all over, too.
All right.
We're glad,
show.
glad to meet you.
We're going to be in Rome in no time.
We're going to be in Rome in 3 days.
We're going to drink up and off.
Among a number of cameramen there to record the link-up was Paul Wyand of Movietone, just getting out of the car. General Clark himself was quickly on the scene, and as we know, the Allied advance following the link-up has forged ahead. After the smashing of the Gustav and Hitler lines, and after this link-up of the armies, the next phase was a race to cut off the retreating enemy, and the number of prisoners taken is mounting daily. Quite a different tale from the old German boasts about their impregnable Italian defenses. In Italy, history is being made as the battle for Rome and the rest of the country is resumed in full force. Pictures just received show troops moving into action on the Cassino sector of the front. Our story will show British and Indians on the job of cracking through the Gustav line, but of course it's an Allied drive that's now in progress, and terrific work has also been done by the French, the Americans, and the Poles. In the Cassino sector, before the fall of Cassino itself, an early success was the crossing of the Gari River, under cover of smoke and the concentrated fire of field guns, howitzers, mortars, and machine guns. A number of machine guns employed in maintaining harassing fire on the famous Highway 6 were firing a burst every 2 minutes, night and day, and used up 340,000 rounds each in 3 days' work. From north to south, the so-called impregnable Gustav line was broken and the advance continued. Already at least one German division has been wiped out and 3 others very severely mauled. Thousands of prisoners have been taken, many of them from among Hitler's crack troops, the parachute men. In spite of outstandingly favorable defensive positions, the Germans in Italy have had to give way. Many have been killed, many have been captured. The rest have retreated to the Adolf Hitler line to make another stand. But as to that, we shall see. A great beginning has been made, and while the battle continues to rage, Allied airmen are playing their important part. By way of example, just look at pictures of the smashing of enemy communications well behind the front by Americans. The smashing of bridges on 2 routes between Florence and Rome. It's over these bridges that enemy supplies and reserves must come down from the north. Looks like a hold-up, doesn't it? These pictures show incidents during the smashing of the much-advertised Gustav line. Smashing is right. Look at what remains of San Angelo, one of the points which the Germans thought would hold against all attacks. But here, British troops broke through the strong defenses, and now the Germans are singing a very different tune, talking of our overwhelming strength in tanks and so on. Castelforte was another German bastion smashed by the onward sweep of Allied forces. Americans of the Fifth Army have taken a great stride forward, pushing on into the Hitler line. And the French. They too have done terrific work. Knocked out German tanks, perhaps the most interesting part of the scenery here, bear witness to the rout of the Boche from his so-called impregnable positions. French triumph was undoubtedly some of the most welcome news of all, heartening for their comrades in France itself and significant to the enemy for the future. Down with the swastika, in fact. As for the prisoners, they kept coming in, small groups and large batches. Congratulations on being taken prisoner or what? 6,000 and they were still coming in. Here are a few types, accent on youth, I should say. Once again, the Boche is crying kamerad in Italy, and that's a notion destined to spread. They have to be de-loused, just as all Europe has to be de-Nazified.
In a very controversial move, the American commander of Fifth Army, Mark Clark, opted to swing the bulk of his forces in the option called Operation Turtle for the liberation of Rome, which the Germans did not defend. He sent only a fraction of his forces north in pursuit of the Germans in Operation Buffalo. The effect of this was that the German forces escaped. They reached their next defensive lines before the forces of Buffalo driving north could seal them off.
The Germans did not want to face the Allies on the rolling plains towards Rome, so they had begun another retreat towards a new defensive line. German troops hastily evacuated Rome before the Allies arrived. The Fifth Army entered Rome on June the 4th. They were greeted by near hysteria from the beleaguered Romans. The first major Axis capital had fallen, and the celebrations began.
Men of the Fifth Army soon made themselves at home. It wasn't long before Scotsmen were showing the Romans what's what in the way of music. The people of Rome soon found out quite a lot of things about Scotsmen, all about kilts, for instance. Quite. General Clark and General Alexander reviewed troops, and the CNC, addressing the men afterwards, had a word to say about the significance of the Italian campaign and its relation to the landings in France.
The present battle, which has finished its first phase, has been a magnificent success. As the French would say, une belle victoire. But it is only the beginning of more and future great successes. Before the Western invasion was launched, we hoped to be able to present them with a great victory. And we were just able to do it. We were able to present them with the fact that we'd broken through two very strong defended lines, the Gustav line and the Adolf Hitler line, and incidentally the last and third line, which is the one covering Rome, and smash the German armies in the field and take Rome. And that is the present we gave our brothers in the West just before they set off on their expedition across the Channel.
What do you think about this, fellas? Have you any sisters? Have you any sisters? No sabi inglese? Come state?
Bene.
Soldati, positivi, sorelle.
Sorelle?
Forse signore,
No.
sorelle? Just a job lucky George.
2 days later, the fall of Rome would be eclipsed by events in France. Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy, had begun. The campaign in Italy would now take a back seat to events unfolding in France.
A free Rome assembles in the Piazza San Pietro to receive the Pope's blessing. Free Rome prays, remembering the dead.
The Germans were building their next defensive line, christened the Gothic Line, in the mountains further north of Rome. Lesser German units were left in the path of the Allies as they surged forward after the liberation of Rome. The advance covered some 270 miles by the start of August.
The latest news from the Italian battlefront is the King's visit, but the latest pictures show the 8th Army occupying Arezzo, 54 miles southeast of Florence. Arezzo, capital of the province of the same name, is perched on a hill, and there was hard fighting before the British troops finally broke through. As you can see, Arezzo got knocked about in the process. New Zealanders, as well as other Empire troops, took part in the attack, which marked another step forward towards the complete occupation of Italy.
On August 4th, the Allies reached Florence, to be met by the now familiar cheering crowds.
The Allied armies in Italy, whose brilliant work has naturally been somewhat overshadowed by great events nearer home, have now reached Florence. Latest pictures show the 8th Army moving in. No one really expected that the Germans would treat Florence as the open city they'd declared it to be. All the same, masterly work by the Allies under General Alexander had got them out, while at the same time preserving most of the city. The first troops in were quick to search for German rearguards and snipers, and Italian patriots were quick to point them out. Views over the city show not only the state of preservation of the buildings, they also show the difficult mountainous country that lies beyond. The Gothic Line, in fact. The Germans had destroyed all the bridges over the Arno except the Ponte Vecchio, and they demolished buildings on the approaches to that. Our troops were eagerly welcomed, but the people of Florence had been having a bad time, being short of food and water. Sniping, too, was still going on, and patriots were doing their best to finish off resistance by the enemy, including Italian fascists.
The Italians had suffered under German occupation. Uprising by partisans had been met with cold-hearted reprisals by the Germans. For every German killed by the partisans, dozens of innocent civilians were rounded up and killed. Under the Italian fascists, the Jews had been persecuted, but there had not been the wholesale slaughter that the Germans had wanted. Once the Germans were in occupation, Jews were deported to death camps. However, the Vatican, despite all rumors about collaboration with the Nazis, sheltered many thousands of Jews. By August the 25th, 8th Army had reached the Gothic Line, and by the 29th, the line had been pierced. Kesselring threw in a number of divisions to push back the Allied advance. If the Allies reached the plains of the Po Valley, the war in Italy would be over. Allied troops from the 5th and the 8th still had to cross an endless series of ridges and valleys. They were sustaining heavy casualties, and once again, the weather was worsening.
U.S. Army Signal Corps pictures tell the story of what it's like in sunny Italy today. Rain and mud on the 5th Army front have produced appalling conditions after some of the worst weather ever experienced in this part of the world. In spite of everything, including counterattack, the Allies in Italy have been battling on. As you can see, the going has been very tough indeed, quite apart from stiff resistance by the Hun. The film speaks for itself on the subject of the weather. The town of Borgo San Lorenzo had assumed quite a Venetian appearance following torrential rains and widespread flooding. Civilians were marooned in their houses, and at least one bunch of children enjoyed a thrilling rescue by jeep. All very interesting for Italian civilians, but not so amusing for British and American troops engaged in fighting Germans as well as rain and mud.
The campaign degenerated into a war of attrition, with supplies and reinforcements to both sides being cut off. By October, the Allied offensive was called off, and troops dug in for a long winter. The Allies' final major offensive began on the 1st of April 1945. Artillery attacks were supported by massive air raids on German positions. The 8th Army would attack across Lake Comacchio and on across the Senio and Santara rivers.
Pictures of the 8th Army attack on the Senio River line. Marathas, men from central India, are seen moving up to the attack as the Battle of Northern Italy flares up into greater prominence again. And men from the United Kingdom advance against some of the enemy's best troops, strongly dug in among well-fortified positions in good defensive country. But in spite of these factors, good progress has been made by the 8th Army and the 5th as well in the opening phase of the Italian summer offensive. Good progress made and many prisoners taken by men who, though crowded out of the headlines, are most certainly not a forgotten army. The glory of their past victories will never be forgotten while military history is read. And the part they are still destined to play, especially if Hitler hopes to include northern Italy in his so-called redoubt, will imply a campaign of the greatest importance. Already they've done big things at the Senio River, and with all the determination and efficiency for which these veterans are famous. Attacking the Hun, who is said to have at least equal numerical strength out there, beating him back and burning him out. Infantry and flamethrowers in action provided this grim impression of the violent struggle to clear all Italy of Hitler's fanatics.
On April 17th, the British 8th Army took Argenta. This was the gateway to the Ferrara and Po rivers. An attack on Bologna was launched as the final days of the German occupation of Italy unfolded.
pictures taken in Milan and only just released here show the last of the Huns to leave that Italian city. They had quite a send-off, too.
Mussolini attempted to reach a peace agreement with the Allies, but as he tried to slip across the border to Switzerland, dressed in German uniform, he and his mistress Clara were captured by Italian partisans and thrown in jail. On April 28th, they were both shot, and their bodies left in the street for Italians to vent their anger on. Il Duce was finally strung up on a lamppost by his feet. An inglorious end to a man who had taken his country into a war the Italian people did not want.
Firemen were called in to disperse the mob, who were by now, well, what shall we say, perhaps a trifle overexcited. The final ghastly scene was the hanging of the bodies upside down outside a petrol station. Well, at least it's a warning to all remaining fascists everywhere.
By now, the Allies were advancing across the Po Valley, and the Germans were in full retreat. Allied aircraft had destroyed all the bridges across the river, cutting off the Germans' main escape route.
Latest pictures show the Allied entry into Bologna, where they received the sort of welcome that is nowadays accorded everywhere when people are freed from Nazi rule. The Allied armies in Italy have contained many elements besides American and British. All have fought superbly in a unique comradeship, but more than half of the total were British, and the majority of that half came from the United Kingdom. Now the glory of the great victory is shared by them all, whatever their nationality, and by their leaders.
The Germans surrendered on the 29th of April 1945. All fighting was to cease by May 2nd. War in Italy was finally over.
It wasn't long after the capture of Bologna that the Allied armies under General Clark, that daring American soldier, as Mr. Churchill has called him, completely crushed the German will to continue the fight. The Supreme Commander, Field Marshal Alexander, has proved beyond all doubt one of the greatest military leaders of this war. In the dark days, he was last to leave France. In Burma, he extricated an army. In the Mediterranean, he has planned and achieved total victory. Prisoners were already being taken in their tens of thousands when the Hun surrendered unconditionally. A surrender involving nearly 1 million German soldiers. Comment on such an event is superfluous. In the royal palace at Caserta, the German delegates, a colonel and a major, came in to sign the surrender wearing mufti. Alexander's Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Morgan, addressed them.
I understand that you are prepared to sign terms of surrender on behalf of General von Wietinghoff, Commander-in-Chief Southwest.
Yeah. When it came to signing, the German colonel made a statement about not being able to guarantee that the terms would be accepted by his superiors.
Ich kann dies aber nicht mit völliger Sicherheit versprechen.
He assumes that his commander-in-chief is going to approve of his action, but he cannot give an absolute assurance to this effect.
We accept those conditions.
Though it would be interesting to know why the Germans were not in uniform, It was obviously a moment of the greatest satisfaction to the Allied officers watching them sign on the dotted line. After General Morgan had added his signature to the historic documents, the Germans were given 3 copies, one of them in their own language, and the brief proceedings were politely but firmly brought to an end by the General.
Thank you, gentlemen. I ask you to withdraw now.
That was that. Unconditional surrender of nearly 1 million men, signed away by German officers in sports coats.
The Allies committed themselves to a campaign on the Italian mainland without having thought it through in strategic terms. The decision to invade mainland Italy after Sicily was taken for political reasons, very good political reasons, the prospect of getting an Italian surrender. After that, the German decision to defend south of Rome committed the Allies to the Italian campaign itself. After the problems with the Salerno landings, the German decision to defend south of Rome committed the Allies to a major campaign. Whereas in terms of Italy itself, they could simply have gone on to the defensive and sat holding southern Italy. In terms of wider strategy, it was important that they keep attacking through winter 1943 to 44. Although those battles in themselves achieved very little, in the wider picture they were an important part of Allied strategy. The political success in liberating Rome must be offset against the opportunity which most people believe was there to end the campaign in autumn 1944 by trapping the German forces as they tried to retreat. That failure was certainly a missed opportunity, but even if the opportunity had been taken and the German forces in Italy eliminated that early, there was no prospect by then of a continued advance north. Churchill's soft underbelly strategy had finally gone with the Normandy campaign. So to that extent, the opportunity was missed, but it was not of overwhelming strategic importance. The same can be said of the rest of the campaign in Italy through 1944 to 1945 and the final successful break through the Gothic Line. It was a useful contribution to the Allied war effort, but it was never going to be decisive, and the troops that fought it recognized this.
The troops in Italy were laughingly referred to as D-Day Dodgers, but their experiences in the battle for Italy were far harder than the newsreels had made out. Somehow, the Italian campaign has been forgotten in the history of World War II, perhaps because the nature of the battles do not make it an easy campaign to categorize. The men that fought and died in Italy played a vital part in World War II. Often let down by poor planning, their contribution to the victory over fascist tyranny in Europe should never be forgotten.